Welcome. This episode was made with NotebookLM. It serves as a refresher for those already familiar with MCDP 7 learning and a solid overview for those beginning to study it. This document explains the Marine Corps' learning philosophy and why continuous learning is a professional expectation tied directly to maneuver warfare. Our ability to sense change, adapt, and decide under friction and uncertainty. We'll focus on three themes. First, the balance of training for the known and education for the unknown, because war demands both competence and judgment. Second, the culture of learning. Leaders, instructors, and Marines each create conditions for initiative, critical thinking, and honest feedback. Third, the learner-centric environment, self-directed study, deliberate practice, and assessments used as tools, supported by technology where it helps. Semper Fi and enjoy.
In today's dynamic global landscape, the most decisive edge isn't just about having the fanciest weaponry anymore. It really seems to be shifting towards the intellectual agility of the people actually using the tools, their capacity to outthink, to adapt faster than any adversary. Especially when you consider how threats are constantly evolving and operational environments, well, they're shifting at frankly breathtaking speed. That intellectual edge feels absolutely paramount. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack critical sources and really get to the core insights. And today, we're diving deep. Think of this as an analytical discussion, maybe like a good PME seminar, focusing on a truly foundational document that tackles this challenge head-on. The U.S. Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 7, or MCDP 7, titled Learning. Our mission today really is to get past the surface summaries. We want to uncover the deeper philosophy, the foundational principles, and maybe most importantly, the why behind this critical publication. This isn't just a basic overview. We're aiming to revisit this doctrine with a seasoned perspective, engaging with the ideas in a way that hopefully resonates with your own experiences, whether you're active duty, a veteran, or a military scholar. So as we go through this, I'll be posing some probing questions, maybe tossing out some scenarios, sometimes even playing devil's advocate just to fully explore what this text implies. And joining me to provide the in-depth explanations, the context, all firmly grounded in MCDP 7, is our expert.
Thanks. It's definitely a vital publication to dig into. And, the foreword itself really sets the stage perfectly for what we're talking about today. It states pretty clearly, the purpose of this publication is to describe the Marine Corps learning philosophy and explain why learning is critically important to the profession of arms. Learning is an institutional priority and a professional expectation for all Marines. That's not a suggestion, right?
Yeah.
It's a core identity statement. It's essential if the Marine Corps wants to be a truly effective learning organization.
Yeah, that opening declaration, institutional priority and a professional expectation for all Marines. It's incredibly powerful. It really kicks off this whole first section on the foundational philosophy. So let's start right there with the why. Why did the Corps feel it was necessary to, formalize concepts that, as the document itself says, have been passed on by Marine leaders throughout our history? What does formalizing really mean for an organization that's so steeped in tradition? And what are these aspirational goals it's trying to hit?
That's a great question. Formalizing does something crucial. It takes what was often, anecdotal wisdom, passed down maybe inconsistently, and elevates it. It makes it a universal codified standard. It gives everyone a common language and makes it crystal clear that continuous learning isn't just for some. It's a professional expectation for every single Marine, regardless of rank or billet.
So it's not about getting rid of tradition then?
Not at all. It's actually about making the best parts of that tradition explicit, understood, and applied consistently across the entire force. The aspirational goal here is really about transforming the Corps into a more effective learning organization, moving beyond just individual pockets of excellence towards collective institutional adaptability. It sets a clear benchmark for what it means to be a modern Marine, ready for whatever the future throws at us, by ensuring everyone's working off the same sheet of music when it comes to learning.
Okay, so codifying wisdom for a broader, more consistent impact makes sense. Now, how does MCDP 7 explicitly connect this idea of continuous learning to the gritty realities of maneuver warfare, especially against a thinking enemy? It feels like it cuts right to the heart of combat effectiveness.
Oh, it's absolutely central to how the Corps approaches warfighting. The publication lays it out plainly. Continuous learning is essential to maneuver warfare because it enables Marines to quickly recognize changing conditions in the battle space, adapt, and make timely decisions against a thinking enemy. These aren't, abstract academic ideas. They are crucial, practical warfighting skills. And the document really hammers home that these abilities, this adaptability, this decision-making skill, must be learned, developed, and honed over time. And importantly, if neglected, they quickly atrophy.
They fade away if you don't practice them.
Exactly. General Berger, in the foreword, he reminds us about the fundamental nature of war: fear, uncertainty, ambiguity, chance, horror, and above all, friction. Continuous learning is the active, deliberate preparation to counter those exact elements. It's how you ensure Marines stay sharper, faster, and more adaptable than any potential adversary.
That's a really potent connection. So when MCDP 7 calls learning a professional responsibility for all Marines, it sounds like much more than just, another box to tick on a PME checklist. What are the real personal and collective implications of that for a Marine's duty to their buddies, to the Corps, to the nation?
It's profoundly deeper than a checklist item. Professional responsibility signifies that it's a core duty. It's non-negotiable. It demands active, continuous engagement in learning so that every Marine is truly prepared to contribute effectively, to be the best possible support for their fellow Marines, for the unit's mission, and ultimately for the nation.
So it's not just about self-improvement.
Not solely, no. It's fundamentally about collective readiness and mission accomplishment. The document stresses the need to develop the habit of continuous learning early in their careers to set the conditions for success in increasing levels of responsibility. It's about building a career-long trajectory where learning and adaptation keep pace with, or ideally stay ahead of, the escalating demands of leadership and the changing character of war.
Okay, so let's get into the definition then. When MCDP 7 talks about learning, it clearly means more than just cramming facts for a test. It defines it as developing knowledge, skills, and attitudes through study, experience, or instruction. And it explicitly distinguishes this from merely gathering information or reciting facts.
So what are the crucial components that really define learning in this context? How does it move beyond rote memorization? Right. MCDP 7 frames learning as this never-ending progression. And crucially, it includes understanding the intent of the learning, the why behind it. It's not passive reception of information. It encompasses a really broad spectrum of dimensions: cognitive, physical, social, emotional, ethical, and cultural components. And this happens in both formal settings like schools and informal ones like daily interactions or field exercises. Critically, these developing knowledge, skills, and attitudes, the KSAs, they all interact. They influence how Marines think, respond, and act. It's about integrated transformation, changing how you operate, not just accumulating data points in your head.
That's a very comprehensive view. The publication also carefully separates or delineates between training and education. Training prepares for known factors, marksmanship, standard procedures. Education prepares for the unknown, complex decision-making in fluid situations. How are these two, despite having different focuses, seen as inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing for readiness on a modern battlefield?
Yeah, they are truly inextricably linked. You can think of them as two sides of the same readiness coin. Training is that essential learning by doing piece, building proficiency in specific repeatable tasks until they're second nature. Muscle memory, procedure mastery. Education is the intellectual development side. It fosters adaptability, critical thinking, judgment, the ability to handle novel situations where there's no checklist. The document is adamant that both are required working together to instill readiness and effectiveness.
So you can't just focus on one.
Absolutely not. General Berger's Commandant's planning guidance is quoted here, and it's quite direct. We will not train without the presence of education. We must not educate without the complementary execution of well-conceived training. Quote, the ultimate point, the real intended outcome of both activities is learning. Learning is the overall intended outcome of both training and education. You simply can't build a truly prepared, adaptable force without that synergy.
Okay, the synergy is key. And ultimately, all this continuous learning, this blend of training and education, it's aimed at developing competence. Why is this competence so crucial for Marines? For enabling them to think critically, develop judgment, and cultivate a bias for action without waiting to be told what to do, especially under the chaos of combat where close supervision might just be impossible.
Competence defined in the doc is having sufficient knowledge, judgment, and skills is the end goal because it's the bedrock of initiative and effective decision-making, especially under pressure. The document paints a pretty stark contrast. It says a Marine might have knowledge and skills, but if they lack judgment, they require close supervision. We know combat rarely affords that luxury.
Right, things happen too fast.
Exactly. The Marine Corps ethos demands competence, responsibility, loyalty, and self-discipline. Learning is the engine that cultivates these traits. It prepares Marines to exercise initiative. But importantly, initiative within the commander's intent. It empowers every single Marine to be a thinking, acting node in the network, constantly seeking to improve developmental agility and deal with changing situations, rather than just waiting for orders. It's about proactive engagement, not reactive compliance.
Okay, that sets a really strong foundation. We've talked about the why and the what of learning. Now let's connect that philosophy directly to the battlefield. How does this whole concept of continuous learning become the actual engine-driving maneuver warfare, particularly when we look at it through the lens of something like the ODO loop? MCDP 7 states, maneuver warfare requires intelligent leaders at all levels who possess a bias for intelligent action. What specific cognitive competencies does learning develop to forge this intellectual edge that's so vital for winning?
This is really where the rubber meets the road, connecting the intellectual to the operational. The document gets quite specific here. It details critical cognitive competencies like problem framing, mental imaging, critical thinking, analysis, synthesis, reasoning, and problem solving. These aren't just nice-to-haves, they're essential tools. It explains that these skills are what enable Marines to make effective decisions more quickly in time-constrained operational environments when they often have incomplete, inaccurate, or even contradictory information. That's the reality of combat, right? Fog and friction.
Absolutely.
This isn't just academic theory. It's about survival and mission success. It's exactly what General Mattis meant with his famous line, "The most important 6 inches on the battlefield is between your ears." Learning literally builds that capacity to process chaos and respond intelligently, not just reactively.
Yeah, that Mattis quote, it always lands with impact. Okay, so let's link this intellectual edge now to one of the core ideas of maneuver warfare. Attacking the enemy's decision-making process using the ODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. How does having this intellectual edge translate directly into, as the document puts it, attacking the enemy's ability to make decisions and to shift the mental aspects of warfare to the Marines' advantage?
It's all about tempo, but specifically cognitive tempo. Continuously developing these cognitive skills allows Marines to cycle through that ODA loop more quickly and effectively than the enemy. The whole concept hinges on the idea that the warfighter who recognizes what is happening, adapts to the situation, and then makes effective decisions in the shortest amount of time will typically have an advantage. You get inside their decision cycle.
You make them reactive.
Precisely. And this speed, this effectiveness, it becomes even more critical as technology accelerates the pace of change in future conflicts. But, and this is a really important caution in the document, Marines should never depend upon technology alone as a solution. Technology supports, it doesn't replace the human cognitive element. And crucially, the ACT part of the loop includes Marines effectively communicating decisions to their teams. So a faster individual ODA loop gets amplified across the entire force through clear communication. It's about achieving human cognitive superiority, enabled by tech, but not solely reliant on it.
That's a vital distinction, not being solely reliant on tech. To make this really concrete, the document includes a really compelling vignette. It's about a Marine Infantry Company commander adapting tactics on the fly in OEFOFF. Can you walk us through that example? Highlight how that rapid cycle of observation, adaptation, and decisive learning allowed them to overwhelm the enemy.
Yeah, it's an excellent illustration of learning under fire. The scenario describes this company commander who, pretty early in an operation, recognized that the enemy was already anticipating and countering the unit's tactics. They weren't sticking to the script.
So initial plan wasn't working?
Right. After assessing patrols, the commander didn't just keep doing the same thing. He adapted quickly. He integrated gun vehicles from the battalion's weapons company, creating a much more mobile, hard-hitting force. But it didn't stop there. As the enemy then tried to adjust to these new Marine tactics, the commander kept learning, kept adapting again. When the enemy started setting ambushes specifically for these vehicle-mounted patrols, the Marines flipped the script. The enemy ambushes would instead walk into well-planned ambushes by foot mobile elements that the Marines had positioned at critical points.
Turning the tables.
Exactly. This constant iterative adaptation created a situation where, from the perspective of the enemy, the Marine force seemed overwhelming, omniscient, and omnipresent. They couldn't predict what was coming next, the result. The enemy effectively ceased offensive operations in that area. The core takeaway, as MCDP 7 puts it, is that the Marines managed to outthink and overwhelm an enemy who failed to do the same. And it underscores that point about developing memory skills too, because you cannot always rely on technologies or on being able to digitally search for information during combat. You need that internalized knowledge and adaptability.
That example really drives home how dynamic, continuous learning can be way more decisive than just having more firepower or sticking rigidly to a plan.
Okay. Let's pivot now to the key principles of learning that MCDP 7 lays out. These really feel like the blueprint for developing Marines in an increasingly complex future. That's a good way to put it. These principles are explicitly designed to prepare the Marine Corps for what's coming challenges like facing enemies with technological parity or even superiority. The overall aim is to foster a more lethal thinking force by embedding these core ideas about continuous learning, both personally and organizationally. That context is crucial. So principle 1, know yourself and seek self-improvement. Why start here? Why is self-awareness understanding your own mindset, values, ethics, experiences the very first principle? And how does it help overcome that friction the document talks about in the learning process? Self-awareness is foundational because, as the document states, a Marine's mindset, values, ethics, and experiences impact his or her learning, decisions, and actions. Everything flows from that internal landscape. Being self-aware helps you identify your own assumptions, your biases, maybe emotional triggers, other factors that color how you perceive information and learn.
Things that get in the way.
Precisely. General John R. Allen is quoted linking character, will, and intellect, saying they're inseparable, with intellect providing the context for decisions. Learning isn't always smooth sailing, it encounters friction. This friction can come from ego, maybe a lack of emotional regulation, confirmation bias, even poor time management. By understanding yourself, how your values, your experiences shape your learning, you can consciously work to overcome that friction and genuinely pursue self-improvement. It's about knowing your internal terrain before trying to navigate the external one.
Interesting. Okay, principle 2, be ready and willing to learn. This sounds simple, but beyond just showing up, what does it really mean for a Marine to embody this principle? What qualities, what active roles are expected?
Being ready and willing goes far beyond passive compliance. It means embracing learning as a professional responsibility throughout their careers. It means actively, constantly seeking opportunities to learn. It's a very active role. It involves cultivating intellectual curiosity, always looking for new ways to adapt what they have learned to other relevant situations. The document lists key qualities: humility, courage, integrity, perseverance, motivation, and discipline. And a crucial element mentioned is metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. Awareness of your own thought processes. Marines are expected to sharpen their intellect by studying how to think better and then applying these skills to improve as learners, leaders, and decision makers. It's about actively honing the tool of your own mind.
That kind of introspection seems vital. But, for a young Marine, maybe knee-deep in demanding training or on deployment, how do you keep them focused on the why when the what and how are so immediate, so intense? Isn't it easy for that deeper purpose to get lost in the noise?
That's a really critical practical question, and it leads us right into principle 3. Understand why you are learning. The document makes a strong case here. It says that when Marines understand why they are learning concepts and skills, two things happen. They are more motivated to learn, and they are better able to apply concepts and skills to new situations. This directly boosts their competence and, crucially, their adaptability.
So the why fuels motivation and application.
Correct. In the chaos of battle, the document reminds us unknowns, uncertainty, and disorder will never be eliminated. Understanding the why behind their training and education allows Marines to focus on learning the known and adapting to the unfamiliar more quickly and effectively than the enemy. End quote. And here's a direct quote that really lands the point. Outlearning the enemy is therefore the key to outfighting the enemy. It's about leveraging that cognitive understanding for a tactical advantage, even when, as you said, the immediate what and how are utterly chaotic.
Outlearning is the key to outfighting. That's a powerful distillation. Okay, principle 4. Provide and receive constructive feedback. MCDP 7 is emphatic. One cannot learn without feedback. Can you unpack the two sources it mentions, intrinsic and extrinsic feedback? And how does actively seeking and responding to both contribute to that critical quality of adaptability?
Feedback is the engine of adaptation, really. The document breaks it down nicely. Intrinsic feedback is internal. It's the Marine feeling the recoil, adjusting their grip, self-correcting their trigger pull based on their own senses and judgment. Extrinsic feedback is external. It's the coach, the instructor, the AAR, identifying an error or suggesting an improvement. Both are vital. Adaptability is defined as the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. You develop this by examining a situation, recognizing what is happening, and adjusting their response to the new conditions. The very act of learning, driven by feedback, is a form of adaptive behavior and is an essential element of combat effectiveness. So seeking, receiving, and importantly, acting on feedback is how Marines continuously tune their ability to adapt to shifting missions, environments, and enemy tactics.
Makes sense. And the final principle, number 5, learning is purpose-driven to develop professional competence. The key terms here seem to be purpose-driven and team-oriented. How do these twin aspects ensure that learning leads to genuine professional competence and the ability to operate effectively as part of that complex system that made GTF against sophisticated adversaries?
This principle really ties it all together. It underlines that Marine Corps learning isn't random. It has specific goals and measurable objectives. It's directed towards building warfighting capability, and it's fundamentally team-oriented. The focus is on collective skill development because Marines fight collectively, usually as part of a Marine air-ground task force.
It's not an individual sport.
Definitely not. Marines learn by doing, i.e. experiential learning, as well as from each other, solving problems together as teams, as units. This purpose-driven approach even extends to studying history and world events, not just for general knowledge, but specifically to be more prepared to respond to new challenges, to understand those complex enemy or adversary systems. So this holistic, team-focused, purpose-driven learning ensures Marines develop the integrated competencies needed to adapt and, critically, outthink enemies in incredibly complex and dynamic situations.
That really sets the stage perfectly for thinking about how you actually build that kind of learning culture. Which brings us to our next section. Cultivating the learning ecosystem, the culture, the environment, the leadership that makes it all work. Let's start with a pretty bold claim MCDP 7 makes. Ideas and methods can have a more significant impact on warfighting than weapon systems, technology, or organizational structures. Wow, that's a profound statement, especially today with all the focus on high-tech gear. Given that emphasis in MCDP 7, are we maybe institutionally underinvesting in the ideas and methods side? And if so, what's the biggest risk there?
That statement is almost revolutionary in its simplicity, isn't it? Ideas and methods can have a more significant impact than weapon systems.
Yeah.
It's a direct challenge, I think, to the sometimes hardware-centric view of military power. It's a reminder that even with the best gear in the world, if your thinking, your adaptability, your methods are slower or less effective than the enemy's, you're still likely to lose.
The human element.
Exactly. And a strong learning culture is precisely what allows that philosophical stance to become operational reality. It's the culture that fosters those key attributes: adaptability, creativity, critical thinking, active listening, and a bias for action. This culture instills the maneuver warfare philosophy, that expeditionary mindset, the constant pursuit of mastery. If we underinvest in nurturing that culture, the biggest risk is that our expensive advanced technology becomes ineffective. It sits in the hands of a force that can't adapt its thinking fast enough to employ it decisively. There's a great quote from Wynton Marsalis included in the text. Humility engenders learning because it beats back the arrogance that puts blinders on. That humility, fostered by the right culture, is what allows good ideas to flourish and prevents deadly stagnation.
So, ensuring the human element, the thinking element, remains paramount. But the document is realistic. It acknowledges that a hierarchical command structure, while absolutely necessary for military operations, can sometimes have unintended negative effects on learning, like discouraging initiative. People are afraid to speak up or try things. How do commanders actively counter this? How do they foster problem-solving and innovation while still maintaining essential discipline and order?
Commanders are absolutely pivotal here. It starts with them having to prioritize learning for themselves and their subordinates. They have to set the example as learners themselves. Walk the walk. This means dedicating real time and effort to mental fitness, just as much as physical fitness. The doc even suggests integrating learning activities into PT, like practicing radio procedures during a conditioning hike. Small things, but they send a message.
Makes learning part of the routine.
Right. By doing this, by visibly valuing learning, leaders create an environment that actively encourages Marines' adaptability, problem-solving, initiative, reasoning, and innovation, without letting the necessary structure stifle those crucial qualities. It's about empowering Marines to think critically within the framework, not just blindly obey.
Okay, it's easy to say learn from mistakes, but let's be honest, in a high-stakes environment like the military, there's a real tension, isn't there, between tolerating errors for the sake of learning and maintaining the sharp, unwavering discipline needed for combat. How does MCDP 7 navigate that practical challenge without just sounding, overly idealistic or unrealistic?
It's a critical balancing act, and MCDP 7 tackles it directly. It encourages challenging ideas, respectfully and constructively, as a way to improve understanding, but always recognizing the leader makes the final call. The key distinction it makes is how mistakes are handled in training versus combat. Mistakes made during training are framed explicitly as opportunities for leaders to provide feedback essential for their subordinates' learning. The goal is to actively prevent those same errors from happening when lives are on the line.
Learn it here, not there.
Precisely. Colin Powell's quote is used here. There are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Then the document directly links this to risk. Combat is inherently risky. That's unavoidable. But it argues that the greatest mistake in combat could be an unwillingness to act from a fear of risk or a failure to adapt to the changing situation. Therefore, Marines must learn from mistakes in training, take corrective action, and embrace prudent risks. Leaders have the responsibility to define what constitutes reasonable risk in training. It's about calculated growth and adaptation, not recklessness. The ultimate goal is to cultivate a culture where the unit learns faster and better than any potential enemy. Below Wood back in 1918 is a classic example of this. The 4th Marine Brigade went in well-trained by contemporary standards, but they rapidly realized their initial tactics, often based on Allied doctrine, just weren't working against entrenched German machine guns. They didn't just stick to the plan. They observed, they adapted, they started integrating maneuver with better artillery support, deviating significantly from some of the flawed mass assault tactics they'd been taught.
Learning under the worst possible conditions.
Absolutely. And crucially, this battlefield learning wasn't lost. It was analyzed afterwards, institutionalized through rigorous study by figures like Captain John W. Thomason, Jr., leading to changes in training focused on marksmanship, map reading, combined arms, things that profoundly influenced future Marine doctrine, even contributing to the MAD-GTF concept. It shows that cycle. Adapt in battle, learn from it, and make the whole institution stronger.
That's a fantastic historical tie-in, showing learning in the crucible and then making it stick institutionally. So, building this healthy learning culture is clearly complex, lots of moving parts. The document outlines 4 main functional areas of responsibility: the individual Marine, the instructor, the commander leader, and the Marine Corps as an institution. How do these roles interconnect to create that holistic learning culture?
It really is a layered, interconnected system where each part reinforces the others. The individual Marine carries the responsibility for self-education and building a bias for intelligent action. They have to own their learning. Instructors need to be more than just subject matter experts. They must be selected based upon their potential to become effective teachers, facilitators, and mentors, and continuously improve their own teaching skills. Commanders and leaders are crucial. They're responsible for setting the conditions within the unit for the subordinates' professional military learning and development. This means tailoring experiences, fostering cohesion, creating that psychologically safe space to learn. And finally, the Marine Corps as an institution demonstrates its commitment by continuously refining learning methods and providing resources and opportunities for professional development, making sure policies and incentives actually encourage career-long learning. Each level plays a vital interconnected role. You need all 4 working together to cultivate that pervasive culture where learning is truly valued and actively supported from recruit training all the way up.
Okay, that framework makes sense. So that brings us neatly to the professional expectations placed on the individual Marine. How does MCDP 7 encourage Marines to really take ownership of personal learning through things like self-discipline and setting specific professional goals?
It's quite explicit about individual ownership. It states Marines must take ownership of personal learning by creating specific professional goals. It describes a cycle: identify your learning needs, formulate concrete goals, short-term, mid-term, long-term, actively pursue them, evaluate the outcomes, and then adjust those goals to keep them challenging and relevant. It's not a one-time thing. It's an active, ongoing process.
The continuous loop.
Exactly. And Marines are encouraged to discuss these goals with their peers, mentors, leaders, even their subordinates, to get feedback and ensure alignment. The document also clearly states that professional learning expectations rise with seniority. Meaning, as you become more senior, there's a greater expectation that you'll independently broaden the scope of your learning to advance your expertise. More self-direction is expected.
That sense of individual responsibility, of owning your development, seems key. And central to enabling that is the concept of cultivating a growth mindset, which the document contrasts sharply with a fixed mindset. Can you unpack that a bit? How does this psychological approach, believing you can develop versus believing abilities are fixed, directly impact a Marine's willingness to tackle challenges and actually use feedback?
The growth mindset concept is really powerful here. As MCDP 7 describes it, a growth mindset is the fundamental belief that effort and learning can change one's qualities, leading to development and success. Marines with this mindset tend to set learning goals, they actively work on their weaknesses, they seek out challenges rather than avoiding them, and crucially, they embrace feedback and even criticism as opportunities to improve. They see mistakes not as, reflections of their inherent inadequacy, but as signals that they need more effort, more time, better strategies, more practice.
Where's the fixed mindset?
The fixed mindset is the opposite. It's the belief that qualities like intelligence or talent are innate, fixed traits. People with this mindset tend to avoid challenges where they might fail or look bad. They often dismiss or get defensive about feedback that exposes perceived weaknesses because it feels like a judgment on their core self. This obviously leads to stagnation. Leaders play a huge role here. They can actively cultivate a growth mindset in their Marines by attributing success not just to innate talent, you're a natural, but to the process. Your success reflects your excellent preparation, effort, persistence, and practice. Praising the process reinforces the value of effort and learning.
That's a subtle but important leadership technique. And how do leaders and the institutional culture then work to foster intrinsic motivation? That internal drive to learn just because it's inherently satisfying, rather than just for promotion points or to avoid getting yelled at. How do you sustain that across a career?
Intrinsic motivation, that drive from within, is really nurtured by supporting that growth mindset we just talked about. The goal of the Marine Corps learning culture is to make learning itself a rewarding behavior. This means creating an environment where commanders, leaders, instructors, teams, and individuals all actively support and encourage this internal drive. When learning is genuinely seen as a pathway to mastery, to personal growth, to becoming more effective in your profession, rather than just another external requirement or hoop to jump through, it becomes much more sustainable and personally fulfilling over the long haul. People want to do it.
That internal engine is definitely more powerful long-term. And looking at the big picture, the institution itself. How does MCDP 7 mandate this idea of continuous organizational culture change and adaptation? How does it ensure the Corps as a whole keeps exploring, assessing, implementing new ideas, recognizing that, quote, what worked in past or present situations may not continue to work in the future?
The document is very clear that this isn't just about individual Marines changing. The Marine Corps organizational culture itself must continue to change and adapt to enable effective learning. It's not a static target. It's a dynamic process. This requires the institution as a whole to continuously explore new ideas, rigorously assess their feasibility and effectiveness, and implement ideas that work. It's about being willing to question assumptions and try new things. It defines a learning organization, which is the goal is one that actively develops new ideas, tests them, learns from both successes and failures, and always recognizes that what worked in past or present situations may not continue to work in the future. Complacency is the enemy here. This institutional commitment to ceaseless learning, adaptation, and willingness to change is presented as absolutely foundational to the Corps' long-term adaptability and its ability to maintain that warfighting edge.
Okay, that makes sense. The whole organization has to be learning. Now let's drill down into the learning environment itself. MCDP 7 says it's much more than simply the physical space where learning occurs. What does that mean? What broader factors really shape instruction and learning?
It takes a really holistic view. The learning environment isn't just the classroom, the range, or the simulator bay. It encompasses all the factors that influence instruction. This includes the teaching methods being used, the resources available, the technologies employed, the prevailing culture within the unit or schoolhouse, the quality and approach of the instructors, the influence of peers, and even the social elements of how Marines interact and learn together. It's the total atmosphere.
So everything that touches the learning process.
Pretty much. And developing real warfighting skills and competencies, the document emphasizes, requires time, deliberate practice, and repetition in operationally relevant contexts. You can't just learn it from a book. Because of this, there's no single ideal design for a learning environment. Each objective, each group of Marines, the specific conditions you're training for, they all differ. So environments need to be flexible, adaptable, constantly modified to meet the learner's specific needs, and, crucially, to reflect the kinds of conditions they expect to actually encounter in operations.
That emphasis on tailored, flexible, relevant environments resonates. How does the surfaces and gaps concept, which comes from MCDP 1 warfighting, apply here in the context of learning environments? How do Marines, individually or collectively, use this idea to identify their weaknesses and build on their strengths?
Yeah, borrowing surfaces and gaps from analyzing the enemy and applying it to self-assessment is a really neat idea in MCDP 7. For the Marine learner, surfaces are areas of existing understanding strong points that Marines maintain, build upon, and relate. These are your strengths, what you already know and can do. Gaps, conversely, are areas of weaknesses in knowledge, experience, or competencies. These are the areas you need to work on. Identifying these accurately requires awareness, honesty, and judgment. It demands what the document calls continuous and aggressive reconnaissance, but aimed at yourself through self-assessment.
Turning the lens inward.
Exactly. And intellectual humility is absolutely critical here. Learners should not hide gaps in their knowledge. Instead, they should exercise intellectual humility to identify and fill these gaps. Things like open, honest discussions and really high-quality after-action reviews, AARs, are highlighted as prime opportunities for Marines to collectively identify these surfaces and gaps, reflect on performance, and internalize new concepts to fill those gaps and reinforce the strengths.
Continuous and aggressive reconnaissance of your own intellectual landscape. I like that framing. Okay, moving to the nature of Marines themselves, they're inherently expeditionary. The document talks about them being warrior scholars who learn whenever and wherever. Can you give us some concrete examples of how this expeditionary learning happens outside of formal schools, like in daily duties, during deployments, maybe even interactions with other services or nations?
Absolutely. The warrior scholar idea is central. Learning isn't confined to PME or MOS schools. MCDP 7 gives great examples. Learning from leaders, mentors, peers, subordinates, professional reading, field exercises in garrison, and aboard ship. It's pervasive. This includes on-the-job learning during routine tasks, informal discussions about tactics or procedures, professional reading programs, and crucially, interactions with other services, joint forces, and allied or partner militaries. Those offer huge learning opportunities.
Learning from different perspectives.
Definitely. And during deployments, even downtime can be leveraged. The doc specifically mentions using time aboard ship to conduct simulation training, complete professional reading, conduct tactical decision games, rehearse unit standing operating procedures, and discuss warfighting vignettes. The core idea is to seize opportunities for learning in any climate and place, to make every experience, every interaction a potential learning event. This expeditionary learning mindset is really captured well in the discussion about force-on-force exercises. These are described as purpose-driven learning environments that approximate the complexity of war. They're not just games, they're serious learning tools. They're designed specifically to test Marines' brilliance in the basics and their decision-making against a thinking, adaptive peer competitor. The whole goal is getting inside the enemy's decision-making process.
Putting theory into practice against resistance.
Exactly. These exercises deliberately create difficult, ambiguous situations, forcing Marines to confront dilemmas, make mistakes in a controlled setting, adapt their plans, and ultimately learn how to fight and win. And historically, you see this need for adaptive learning everywhere. Think about leaders like Philip II of Macedon or Alexander the Great figuring out complex problems on the move, or modern coalition operations in places like Iraq or Afghanistan. Constant adaptation was required. It underscores that enduring need for leaders and forces who can learn and adapt faster than their adversaries, often with incomplete information.
That's a perfect illustration of applying learning in realistic, demanding contexts. Now, MCDP 7 also states that the learner is the main focus of effort in any learning environment. What does this learner-centric model actually look like? How does it tailor instruction and foster engagement, moving away from maybe a more traditional one-size-fits-all lecture approach?
This learner-centric model represents a fundamental shift in perspective. It puts the onus on leaders and instructors to really understand their Marines, their needs, interests, and abilities in order to inspire, challenge, and motivate them effectively. So instead of a rigid, standardized, one-size-fits-all delivery method, this model tailors the learning delivery methods to be most effective for the learners. It's about customizing the approach.
Meeting the learner where they are.
Precisely. It explicitly asks leaders and instructors to constantly consider, how can I best support the main focus of effort, the learner? This might mean decentralizing learning, providing opportunities for Marines to work at their own pace on certain things, allowing them to explore areas they find particularly useful or interesting, and heavily favoring active learning methods. Things like guided discussions, problem-solving exercises, tactical decision games methods that challenge Marines to think critically and develop their own solutions, rather than just passively receiving information.
That idea of tailoring instruction seems really powerful for engagement. And directly related to this is the concept of self-directed learning. MCDP 7 draws a really compelling parallel between this and mission tactics. Can you explain that connection? How does it empower individual Marines while still acknowledging the need for support and guidance from leaders?
Yeah, that analogy between self-directed learning and mission tactics is quite insightful. Self-directed learning is defined as individuals taking the initiative in identifying their learning needs, formulating goals, pursuing these goals, and evaluating outcomes. It's about the Marine driving their own learning journey. The parallel to mission tactics, as described back in MCDP 1, is clear. A leader assigns a mission, the what and why, but without specifying how the mission must be accomplished. The how is left to the subordinate's initiative, judgment, and understanding of the intent.
Decentralized execution based on intent.
It's exactly. Both concepts empower the individual. In self-directed learning, the Marine has the freedom, and indeed the duty, to figure out the necessary steps to achieve their learning goals. They determine the how. But just like mission tactics requires commanders' intent and support, self-directed learning still requires support and guidance from commanders, leaders, mentors, and instructors. It's not just turning Marines loose with no direction. This approach fosters critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and a propensity to ask questions, becoming more effective and frankly more necessary as Marines gain seniority and face more complex challenges. It builds that intellectual edge from the ground up. And this self-directed path is significantly boosted by what the document calls vicarious experience. Learning by observing, reading about, studying what others have gone through. This is deemed critical because even the most realistic training experiences in military education fall short of the reality of combat. You can learn lessons from others' experiences, good and bad.
Learning from history, from case studies.
Right. And techniques like mental imagery are also highlighted. A leader vividly visualizing different scenarios, mentally rehearsing decisions and their potential consequences. This builds confidence and helps explore outcomes before facing them for real.
That brings us to something both General Mattis and General Al Gray were known for emphasizing: the critical importance of self-reflection. Mattis mentioned the lack of reflection as a potential pitfall, especially for senior leaders caught up in the daily grind. Gray famously practiced daily reflection. Why is this personal solitude, as Mattis put it, so vital for actually turning raw experiences into internalized wisdom?
Self-reflection is the crucial internal processing step that transforms experiences, successes, failures, observations into actual learning and usable wisdom. It's where understanding is built. As the document explains, reflection internalizes experiences and increases mental preparedness.
Mattis's point about solitude allows you to reflect while others are reacting hits the nail on the head. It's about deliberately stepping back from the constant stream of inputs and reactions.
Making time to think. Exactly. Making time to leverage your experience and education to engage in prospective decision-making, rather than just reacting to problems as they arise. You anticipate better. General Gray's well-known habit of daily reflection just underscores that this isn't passive. It's a deliberate, disciplined act. It's essential for putting new knowledge into context, exploiting lessons learned, building deeper understanding, and ultimately staying adaptable in a world that demands constant learning.
A discipline in itself. Now, the adage, those who can do and those who have done well teach, gets cited in MCDP 7. How does the publication emphasize the absolutely critical role of knowledgeable, skilled, and empathetic Marine instructors in not just transferring information, but actually inspiring learning and shaping attitudes?
Instructors are presented as absolutely central to the entire learning ecosystem. MCDP 7 describes effective Marine instructors as needing to be knowledgeable, skilled, competent, and confident in their subject matter, of course. But it adds that crucial element. They must also be empathetic. They need to understand their Marines, their strengths, their weaknesses, their learning styles, in order to effectively tailor the learning environment to be more effective. Beyond just imparting knowledge or skills, great instructors inspire learners to want to learn more. They do this by sharing their own relevant experiences, explaining the why behind the learning, and demonstrating genuine passion for the subject and for the Marines' development. The document stresses the core commitment to attracting, rewarding, and retaining a highly qualified cadre of instructors and thoughtfully rotating experienced Marines through operational, instructional, and educational assignments. This ensures that hard-won expertise and effective teaching methods are constantly being disseminated and refreshed throughout the force.
Okay, shifting now to assessments. Tests, evaluations, etc. MCDP 7 seems to want to reframe these, whether diagnostic, formative, or summative, not as just judgments or gates, but as constructive feedback tools for both the learner and the instructor. It even states explicitly that Marines learn because of their errors, not despite them. How does this perspective fundamentally change the approach to evaluations?
This reframing of assessment is really critical to fostering that growth mindset culture. Assessments aren't primarily about assigning a grade or ranking people. They're seen as vital feedback tools that guide the entire learning process and help determine actual proficiency. The different types serve different roles. Diagnostic assessments figure out what learners already know coming in. Formative assessments provide feedback during the learning process to guide adjustments. And summative assessments measure what was learned after an activity or course. The key emphasis is that all assessments should be honest, transparent, and constructive. They should employ a coach-teach-mentor approach.
More about development than judgment.
Exactly. Errors, mistakes, failures, they aren't treated as terminal events or reasons for condemnation. Instead, they're viewed as necessary steps in the learning development process. That explicit statement, Marines learn because of their errors, not despite them, is huge. It shifts the entire focus from punishing mistakes to using them as valuable data points for betterment. It encourages learners to take risks in training, knowing that errors will be treated as learning opportunities, providing concrete feedback for both the individual Marine and the instructor on where more focus is needed.
That's a significant cultural shift. And finally, on this section, let's talk technology. While MCDP 7 consistently emphasizes that war is fundamentally a human enterprise, how does it advocate for using technology to support, expand, and individualize learning without letting technology become the sole solution or a crutch?
The document strikes a careful balance here. It's clear that technology is viewed as one tool among many, intended to support, expand, and individualize learning, but never to replace the core human elements of interaction, judgment, and leadership. Technology can be used effectively to collect performance data, enhance the quality and timeliness of feedback, facilitate distributed learning, offer supplemental instruction, and develop specific skills through targeted practice.
Simulations, for example.
Right. Simulations are highlighted as a key application. They can provide additional repetitions for complex tasks, especially when live training resources like time, ammo, or range space are limited. They can also introduce elements like complex enemy actions or dangerous scenarios that might be unsafe or impossible to replicate fully in live training. The key emphasis, though, is on seamlessly integrating technology where it makes sense and making a purposeful selection based on learning objectives. It's not about using tech for tech's sake. It has to demonstrably augment the learning process and contribute to developing better warfighters, not just create digital dependency. Smart application, not over-reliance.
Okay, that's a really comprehensive look at the ecosystem. We've covered a lot of ground of the philosophy, the framework, the culture, the environment. It's clear this doctrine positions learning right at the center of everything the Marine Corps does. So let's turn now to the final piece. The role of the learning leader, the person who embodies, enables, and drives all of this, the exemplar, the teacher, the mentor. John F. Kennedy famously said, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. How does this profound connection manifest specifically in the Marine Corps context, where, as the saying goes, every Marine is either a leader or a future leader?
Kennedy's quote really nails the core idea here. In the Marine Corps, leadership and learning are seen as completely intertwined. Leaders at every level must model and set an example. They can't just tell subordinates to learn. They have to actively pursue their own professional development and openly encourage their Marines to do the same. There's a great point made that an excellent way to master a topic is to endeavor to teach it well to other Marines. Teaching forces deeper understanding and also fosters that shared knowledge and accountability within the unit.
Like learning by teaching.
Exactly. The relationship is even described using an analogy of mature siblings building each other up, sharing experiences honestly, holding each other accountable for growth. And General Dunford's message on the new demands on leaders is referenced, further emphasizing that today's leaders absolutely must have the right training, education, and experience to meet those complex challenges. That connection is non-negotiable.
That strong linkage makes perfect sense. But the document acknowledges a practical challenge, a dissonance. Senior leaders, while often recognizing an even greater need to learn as their responsibilities grow, frequently perceive having less time available to actually do it. The demands just pile up. How does the Marine Corps, through this doctrine, try to ensure continuous learning happens for leaders at all levels, realistically addressing that very real-time constraint?
That dissonance, more need, less perceived time, is a persistent friction point for leaders everywhere, not just in the military. MCDP 7 tackles this by emphasizing that learning must be instilled as a career-long priority. It's not something you do only when you have extra time, it's embedded. Marines are encouraged, maybe even expected, to actively seek opportunities to learn as much as they can in a variety of ways, whatever their current situation or grade, in whatever time they have available. It's about seizing moments.
Finding the pockets of time.
Right. And leaders are explicitly directed not just to find time for themselves, but to prioritize learning for their subordinates too. They have to create the space. There's a powerful quote pulled from MCDP 1, Warfighting. Self-directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. That's a strong statement about priorities.
That really puts it in perspective. Equal time to PT.
It does. And it also stresses that leaders need to provide subordinates with sufficient freedom of action, avoiding excessive micromanagement specifically so they have the bandwidth to learn, develop, and exercise initiative. It's about making learning an embedded, non-negotiable part of the daily and weekly battle rhythm, not an afterthought.
Okay, so it requires deliberate prioritization. Now, moving specifically into the leader's role as teacher and mentor, the document makes a very strong assertion. Marines who cannot teach will struggle as leaders. Can you elaborate on that? Why is teaching ability so fundamental to leadership in this view? And how do strong leaders effectively turn subordinates' mistakes into those teachable moments instead of just punitive events?
That assertion really underscores the inseparable nature of teaching and leading in the Marine Corps context. Strong leaders understand that mistakes are inevitable, especially during challenging training. And they recognize it's far better to learn in a training environment than to make mistakes when deployed. So instead of just pointing out errors or resorting to punishment, they actively transform those mistakes into genuine learning opportunities. General John A. Lejeune's vision of the officer-enlisted relationship as being like teacher and scholar, even father and son, highlights this deep-seated responsibility to develop subordinates.
It's about development, not just correction.
Exactly. Good leaders encourage open discussion after a mistake. They ask questions. What was your thought process? How did your actions contribute to the outcome? What could be done differently next time? This fosters greater self-awareness and deeper understanding in the subordinate. It's about providing constructive, forward-looking feedback that builds the Marine up, helps them learn and improve, which is absolutely vital for overall readiness.
And to make that teaching effective, MCDP 7 mentions a couple of specific techniques: footlocker education and the Socratic method. Can you explain those? How do these methods encourage critical thinking and help Marines arrive at deeper understanding rather than the leader just dictating the right answer?
Yeah, these are great examples of practical leadership as teaching techniques. Footlocker education refers to that informal but incredibly valuable process where tested veterans tell how they survived and how things work. It's that sharing of hard-won experiential wisdom, often in informal settings. General Al Gray is noted as a big proponent and exemplar of this, leaders sharing their stories and insights. The Socratic method is more structured, particularly useful in debriefs or AARs. It involves the leader asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking, draw out ideas, and identify underlying assumptions held by the Marines involved.
Leading them to the answer through questions.
Right. Neither method is about the leader simply dictating the correct solution. Instead, they guide the Marine to reflect, analyze the situation, question their own thinking, and ultimately develop their own judgment and adaptability. This makes the learning much more personal, much stickier, and far more transferable to new, unforeseen situations they'll inevitably face. And the key, again, is that the feedback woven into these methods must be constructive and positive, reinforcing learning and promoting that essential self-awareness.
That's a really dynamic way to approach leadership development. And underpinning all of this, enabling leaders to teach, to learn from mistakes, to seek feedback, is the quality of humility. MCDP 7 identifies this as absolutely foundational. The document states bluntly that ego can hinder learning. How does cultivating humility enable leaders, regardless of their rank, to genuinely learn from anyone's subordinates, peers, juniors, and to accept honest feedback, even when it might challenge their own views or decisions?
Humility is presented as truly the bedrock of continuous growth for a leader. That statement, ego can hinder learning, is direct because ego creates blind spots. It makes leaders resistant to information that contradicts their existing beliefs or exposes a weakness. Cultivating humility means leaders internalize the idea that the more they learn, the more they need to learn. They recognize they aren't and can't be experts in everything. This allows them, even motivates them, to actively seek out those who are experts and learn from them, regardless of relative rank or position. A humble leader isn't threatened by a junior Marine knowing more about a specific piece of gear or TTP. They see it as a learning opportunity.
Rank doesn't equal expertise in everything.
Exactly. And MCDP 1 is referenced again here, reminding us that subordinates have a duty to provide honest, professional opinions, even though these may be in disagreement with the senior's opinions, before a final decision is made. That kind of candid upward feedback absolutely requires humility on the part of the leader to receive it openly and consider it seriously, without seeing it as insubordination or a challenge to their authority. We see examples of this in leaders like General Mattis, who was known for creating an atmosphere where barriers between commanders and staff and officers and enlisted were broken down, fostering open dialogue. And General Gray's practice of holding debriefs with no ranks visible at places like Fort Pickett specifically aimed to remove rank as a barrier to honest feedback and learning.
Those examples really illustrate the principle in action. And how does embracing curiosity, which seems linked to humility and recognizing that reaching a goal along the path to mastery is an indication that it is time to move on to a more challenging goal? Keep driving continuous growth for leaders. It sounds like you never really arrive.
That's exactly it. Humility naturally fuels curiosity. When you acknowledge you don't know everything, it sparks a genuine desire to find out, to seek knowledge, to fill your own gaps in experience, and improve your skill sets. This relentless curiosity is essential because, as the document stresses, mastery is a journey, not a destination. Hitting one learning objective, reaching one level of proficiency, isn't the end point. For a learning leader, it's merely a signal that it's time to set a more challenging goal. This mindset ensures leaders are perpetually growing, constantly building confidence by closing identified gaps, but never becoming complacent or resting on their laurels. They're always pushing themselves and their teams toward greater understanding and competence.
A constant striving. Okay, finally, let's bring it back to the fundamentals. Technical and tactical proficiency, brilliance in the basics. This is a classic Marine Corps tenet. How does MCDP 7 connect this bedrock principle to continuous learning, especially emphasizing deliberate, purposeful, quality practice and self-reflection to identify and close those learning gaps in core skills?
Brilliance in the basics remains absolutely paramount, and MCDP 7 links it directly to continuous learning through the concept of deliberate, purposeful, quality practice. This isn't just about going through the motions or logging hours. It's about focused, intentional practice aimed at improvement. Marines are expected to reflect upon what they have learned, identify learning gaps in their basic skills, and close them. Self-reflection is crucial here for evaluating the quality of the practice itself. Because, as the document bluntly warns, incorrect practice and lack of focus does not lead to perfection. It leads to negative training. You just reinforce bad habits.
Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
Something like that, yes. Marines need to focus on executing the basics correctly, then building speed and agility on that solid foundation and continuously working to enhance their proficiency, not just for their current job, but anticipating the skills needed for their next level of responsibility. It's a continuous refinement process.
And how do collective learning experiences and teamwork building exercises contribute here? How do they develop both the individual Marines' technical and tactical skills and that coordinated, integrated execution that's absolutely vital for MGTF success?
Teamwork, ultimately, is the synergistic combination of highly proficient individuals performing coordinated collective skills. You need both. Learning opportunities abound in the interactions within a team between leaders and subordinates, among peers as they work together. Collective learning experiences like field exercises, simulations, or even just well-structured team training are designed specifically to develop this proficiency at multiple levels. Individual skills, team or crew coordination, unit integration, and ultimately the MAGTF's ability to fight as a cohesive air-ground team. And during these collective exercises, when leaders demonstrate humility, maybe by openly discussing their own decision-making process, their rationale, even mistakes they made during the exercise, it powerfully reinforces learning at all levels of the team. It shows that learning and improving is everyone's job, all the time. So ultimately, all warfighting skills, from the most fundamental individual task to the most complex MAGTF operation, demand that unwavering dedication to continuous learning, with leaders setting the example and fostering that culture of collective skill development needed for mission accomplishment.
Wow, what a truly comprehensive deep dive into MCDP 7. It really hammers home that learning isn't just an adjunct activity or something you do in school. It's positioned as a foundational philosophy, an absolute institutional imperative for the Marine Corps.
Indeed. And just to reiterate that core message, because it's so central, MCDP 7 firmly establishes learning as an institutional priority and, significantly, a non-negotiable professional expectation for every single Marine. It's presented as the fundamental enabler for warfighting readiness, for adaptability, for the ability to operate and win in any environment, from the classroom right into the chaos and friction of combat.
You know, this entire discussion really brings us full circle back to that potent idea of the mind as a weapon and the enduring, maybe even increasing importance of the human dimension of war. In an era where threats evolve so rapidly, where technology is a powerful force multiplier but never the complete answer, it feels like our greatest, most sustainable advantage truly lies in our collective capacity as humans to observe, orient, decide, and act faster, smarter, more adaptively than any potential adversary. This document feels like a testament to that power of human intellect and adaptation. So, as we wrap up, let's leave you, our listeners, with a few reflective questions grounded in today's discussion. First, considering the strong emphasis MCDP 7 places on self-directed learning and intellectual humility, what specific knowledge gap, perhaps a personal bias you recognize, or an area of professional practice? What will you commit to exploring or improving this quarter?
And second, reflecting on the learner-centric model and the critical importance of fostering a growth mindset. How will you, in whatever role you fill, leader, peer, mentor, subordinate, how will you intentionally create or contribute to an environment where mistakes are genuinely viewed as vital learning opportunities, not as failures to be hidden or punished?
And finally, given the expeditionary nature of learning, that powerful idea that Marines are warrior scholars who learn whenever and wherever, what may be unconventional daily activities or periods of deployment downtime or even routine interactions, what opportunities will you consciously leverage for professional development that perhaps you might currently be overlooking? Think about those moments.